Good morning, everyone. My name is Cameron Consarinia. I'm the Policy Director for the National Union for Democracy in Iran, NUFTI. It's a pleasure to welcome all of you to our latest series of NUFTI forums. Today, we'll be discussing the Biden administration and Iran, bipartisan policy solutions for the new administration. And I will, with pleasure, turn it over to Dr. Saeed Ganji, the President and Chairman of NUFTI, to introduce our honored guest today.
Thank you, Cameron. Good morning to our friends joining us from across the United States and beyond. I would like to welcome everyone to yet another NUFTI forum. On behalf of NUFTI, I would like to thank you all for joining us today. As you know, NUFTI is a non-partisan, non-profit organization of Iranian Americans based in Washington, D.C., dedicated to supporting the cause of human rights, freedom, and democracy in Iran. As we have a new administration in place with different views and approaches towards the Islamic Republic in Iran, we thought to invite a couple of prominent Iranian Americans with perhaps different tasks and different take on a topic called bipartisan guidance for the new administration. I want to be very brief in introduction so we have more time to hear from them. The first panelist is the Honorable Bijan Kiyon, who was twice confirmed by the United States Senate. Mr. Kiyon has served 3 presidents from both political parties. In 2016, he served as the deputy lead on Office of DNI for the Presidential Transition Team. He has also served as a member of the Board of Directors of Exim Bank of the United States. He's a member of the White House Business Council, Director of Foreign Investment for the state of California, and a senior fellow for global public policy at the United States Naval Postgraduate School, and a member of the Board of Directors of National Defense University Foundation. Mr. Kiyon is recognized around the world as the senior executive in global trade and international security, a graduate of University of Brighton. In 1979, he has also continued his education at Oxford, Harvard Kennedy School, and MIT. A fellow at the Royal Society of Arts in the United Kingdom, he is also a recipient of the Ellis Island Medal of Honor, also awarded to 7 presidents of the United States. Our second panelist is attorney Zohreh Mizrahi, who is a senior partner and a co-founder of Manesh and Mizrahi law firm in 1989. As one of the nation's foremost specialists in her field, she has served as an expert witness on U.S. immigration laws in federal court and visiting speaker for various media outlets, as well as many universities nationwide. In recent years, attorney Mizrahi began teaching United States immigration laws as an adjunct professor in a University of West Los Angeles. I'd like to welcome both of our distinguished panelists and thank them in advance for all their insight and contribution. Now I ask Cameron to start the meeting. Thank you, Cameron.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ganji. It's a personal pleasure to be with each of these distinguished guests today. You heard just a bit of their backgrounds from Dr. Ganji. I'll begin the questions with you, Your Honor. For our guests who watch Persian language television, Mr. Kiyon will not be a new face. He is a frequent expert analyst and commentator on a variety of Persian language news channels. And it's a pleasure to have you discussing this critical topic for an English language audience today. And we're so pleased that you join us. The first question to you, sir, is officials of the Islamic Republic have seemingly put a very short timeline on a potential U.S. return to Bijan, the JCPOA, or the 2015 Iran nuclear deal. But in recent days, we've even seen some waffling on that with individuals like Javad Zarif saying that it doesn't matter the timeline. How do you view this urgency and what would you advise the administration to do in response?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, first of all, and thank you, National Union for Democracy in Iran, for all the good work that you do. Dr. Ganji, thank you very much for inviting me. It's my pleasure to be with you and your colleagues in Cameron, that's a very good question. The question is the Islamic Republic really as strong as they sound, or should we pose the question in a different way? Well, I believe they're talking to themselves when they put that February 21st deadline. You ask yourself the question, how serious could they possibly be? I'm making an observation that, the initial panic that the administration has changed, that Biden administration is going to jump into reenacting JCPOA and all of that, was probably a bit premature and a bit reactionary. The United States interests do not change with a Republican or a Democratic Party government. The interests remain the same. Now, it's understandable that for internal consumption, people like Mr. Zarif or others would speak according to what serves the particular day's interest and what pleases their supreme leader. It's not so much an effective message to Washington, D.C. The Islamic Republic is not in a position to set a deadline for Washington on such matters. It's a very complicated process. And what is the advice to the administration? I believe, we're looking at very experienced diplomats, national security professionals who understand exactly the complexity of the situation, the unreliability of the Islamic Republic in Iran. And they have learned lessons from 2015 and the first round of JCPOA. Just because Ambassador Sherman, Secretary Blinken, and National Security Advisor Sullivan and others are the same people who negotiated JCPOA, it is unreasonable to ignore the fact that time has changed, the Middle East has changed, Washington has learned lessons from JCPOA, that the Islamic Republic is not a reliable partner in such negotiations. They cheat and lie regularly. Actually, it's mandated by their belief. They believe that if you have to lie, you lie. And if you have to hide something, you hide. It's called hiding it, called kitman, and lying it, it's called tabiyeh, which means lie if you have to in the interest of Islam. So they have learned. I think it's unreasonable to think that Ambassador Sherman is going to be the same Ambassador Sherman, because the Middle East is not the same Middle East. We've had the Abraham Accord that has changed the picture in the Middle East. And, I think the Islamic Republic has changed from 4 years ago as well. They don't have any money. They can't pay their dues at the United Nations, and they're suffering. So their proxies are not getting paid. So their power is reduced tremendously. Let me just say this to you and your distinguished audience, that, those who say, well, 4 years of maximum pressure didn't really change the behavior of the Islamic Republic. Well, that may be what's apparent from the surface. But if you take a deeper dive and take a good look at the Islamic Republic in Iran, you would notice that they're weakened, that change is a process, that it's not as a result of an event. You don't wake up one morning and all of a sudden the Islamic Republic in Iran is not there. It's a change process, and that process has been taking place. And we could say with confidence that the Islamic Republic is not the Islamic Republic of 4 years ago. I can divide the period of the U.S. Islamic Republic relations in two periods, 40 years and then 4 years. I believe there's a distinct difference. They're weak. The people of Iran have the right and the responsibility to choose and change their government. And today we see that the government is afraid of the people. So what's ahead for this administration is lessons learned, moving forward, continuing on the same policies, using the leverage that the previous administration provided, and prepare to win. Because this is not the case where we could look at a win-win. It has to be, we win, you lose, Islamic Republic, and that's the way it is.
Thank you so much for an excellent start to this panel. And in fact, I want to hit on one point you mentioned about the Islamic Republic's propensity to and ease with which they lie. In fact, 2 or 3 days ago, many of our guests probably saw the video go viral of Alavi, the Islamic Republic's Minister of Intelligence, in which he said that the fatwa, or the religious edict from Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, which had purportedly banned the production of nuclear weapons, and was something that President Obama and Secretary Kerry cited several times as a reason to trust the regime, was changeable, and that was no longer a steadfast fatwa, apparently. So excellent point, and thank you so much for that excellent start to this panel. Ms. Mizrahi, turning to you, in 2015, if we look back to the original JCPOA and the original process of signing and negotiating and selling to the American public, many prominent Democrats refused to support the JCPOA. I think that's something that we often forget today. We look at it as a very partisan issue. Republicans were against, Democrats were in favor. That's not the case. In fact, the now Senate Majority Leader, one of the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, Bob Menendez, were both against the JCPOA in 2015. How do you think that senators like Schumer, Menendez, other Democrats who were against the JCPOA in 2015, what will they do if President Biden does indeed look to re-enter the JCPOA?
Cameron, very happy to be part of this panel next to Mr. Kiyon. And I want to commend your efforts in bringing transparent information and development to your audience and many other Iranians living in diaspora or inside Iran. I believe the more accurate information and analysis is given or shared, it would be easier for people to come to their own conclusions, and rightfully so. In this particular case, I want to sort of piggyback on what Mr. Kiyon mentioned earlier about the dynamics of JCPOA and what has developed since then. You know, you have to remember, administration after administration in this country tried to somewhat pressure the Iranian regime to have a behavior in their attitude or in their policies, especially towards Iran, their imposition on the countries in the region, Europe and elsewhere, but it did not prove to be effective. Yes, sanctions could be effective if they're consistent, if they are targeting the right individuals, as we saw in recent years. But once we go back to what led to signing of the Iran deal or JCPOA is that, again, administration after administration tried to come to some sort of understanding on the foreign policy with Tehran regime. And unfortunately, because of the inconsistency of Iran's attitudes and rhetoric, it was very difficult. We saw how Jack Straw was traveling back and forth, the former British minister. It was all to no avail because America was not at the negotiation table. So what Obama had to do was pick lesser of all the evils, and that was to pave the road for talks and negotiations with Iran, engaging the Islamic Republic, giving them an opportunity to come aboard with normal countries, normal governments, and what we consider a more democratic state or reign. But what happened was, even it was during the Obama administration that we had the most extensive and unprecedented sanctions against Iran. And that was also in uniformity and partnership with our European partners. China disagreed, Russia disagreed, but finally, with the imposition of the sanctions against Iran, they relented and they agreed to come to the negotiation table. even during that time, 2013, 14, and 15, many activists were talking to elected officials to oppose the Iran deal, only because it was missing many elements, one of which was the issue of human rights. But the administration was so focused on bringing the Islamic Republic to the negotiation table, giving them an opportunity to act like a normal government on behalf of its people, and that didn't happen. Naturally, people like Chuck Schumer, Ben Menendez, even here, Brad Sherman, and many other Democrats were in opposition to the Iran deal because, again, it was lacking a lot of crucial elements that would even address the US national security, which ought to be the ultimate focus of any administration in this country. So, but a lot has changed since 2015. A lot. I mean, just imagine this past few months, we have 5 states or governments in the region that are talking and have friendship relationship with Israel. We are dealing with a situation where people are becoming more vocal, and Iran or the regime has shown its face. The 2019 protests in Iran proved to be very crucial. Again, I have to go back to the history during Obama administration. It was an election fraud where people were not happy with the results. And again, they were dealing with a so-called reformist candidate and an extremist candidate. But 2019 brought everything out to the surface. And that was when Iranians went to the streets, more younger generation across the country, and they spoke out against the Islamic regime. They no longer wanted a Khamenei or a supreme leader. They no longer wanted a theocracy governing the country. And the world heard that. So it would be very difficult, even for Biden, to want to go back to GCPOA as it was. And as we can see, they have set their demands, and naturally, the Tehran regime has a laundry list of demands instead of showing any sort of willingness to even consider the 12 conditions that were set during Trump administration, and all along the statements that have been coming up from Biden's campaign and all his appointed individuals, that in order for Iran to go back to the negotiation table, they have to reverse what they have done so far. So in this case, I believe not just Chuck Schumer or Ben Menendez, but many other people would vote against a JCPOA as it was before. And we need to make sure that will not happen again.
Thank you so much. One interesting point that you make, among many, of course, was the protests that we saw in 2019 were so vastly different from the protests we saw in 2009. As you mentioned, there was no longer the manufactured division between, or the false dichotomy between, reformists and hardliners. In fact, it was during, as you well know, a quote-unquote reformist president's term. Hassan Rouhani was elected as the smiling cleric, a reformist, and these protests were on his watch, and many of the protests were directly against him. And of course, our compatriots in the country chanted, perhaps most famously, reformist hardliners, the game is up, we're done with both of you. So fascinating points. Thank you so much, Ms. Mizrahi. Mr. Kiyon, I want to go back to you with sort of piggybacking on a point that Ms. Mizrahi mentioned, that the sanctions that were implemented for years, sort of reaching a crescendo point in the early Obama years, that brought the Islamic Republic to the table. of course, brought the Islamic Republic to the table on the nuclear issue. No other issues were discussed there. And since we have seen that the Islamic Republic has said at a variety of levels, be it the supreme leader, be it Mr. Zarif, that they will not discuss issues that are critical to US national security and to the security of our allies in the region, be they Arab nations in the Persian Gulf or Israel, for example, ballistic missiles. They certainly don't seem to be willing to discuss the issue of human rights. Why is it, in your view, sir, that past administrations, at least up into the Trump administration, for basically 40 years, have focused almost exclusively on this nuclear file, certainly the past few administrations, and why have they been unwilling to address the Islamic Republic's other threats, ballistic missiles, the funding of terrorist proxies, which you referenced in your first comment, and of course the issue of human rights. I think for all of us, it's clear that this regime will never be a normal regime. Why is that not clear to foreign powers, chief among them the United States?
It's a very good question, and I want to thank my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Mizrahi, for so elegantly laying out the picture as it is. It's just such a delight to sit here as a Republican to listen to a registered Democrat speaking exactly the same language as anyone caring for the freedom-seeking people of Iran speak. And I want to thank my colleague, Dr. Mizrahi, for observing the facts as she did. You have to take a look at the world view of let's say President Obama. What did he believe in? What did the policymakers around him advised him to do? Their worldview was based on established foreign policy philosophy, which is balance of power. It's making sure that no one has enough power to be able to jeopardize peace in the region. And I could say with confidence that that calculation was wrong. It was not a right calculation. The assumption for that calculation was that, we're dealing with a rational government. They act in their own best interest. And that is not exactly the case because as we've seen, the Islamic Republic doesn't operate that way. And I have to be honest with myself and with the audience and with you and say that I cannot be as forgiving as Dr. Mizrahi about the policies of the 44th President of the United States, who I had the great honor of working for. President Obama loved the country as much as any other president and wanted to do the best he could for America and America's interest. But the policies that he adopted were based on assumptions about the Islamic Republic. And I'll share one of them with you. The political scientists would be quick to remind us that governments do not have a nature. I think that's where you pause and you ask yourself the question, how could you say that about a government that basically wants to take back society and its standards to 1400 years ago? It does have a nature, and it's an unchangeable nature. Those who advocate for patience with the Islamic Republic and advocate for so-called reforms, they must answer a very simple question. If the Islamic Republic is based on Islamic principles, and if you suggest that those principles could be changed, are you not suggesting that Islam could be changed? Which really makes it impossible. Therefore, there is no such thing as a reform that we can go back to. But the change in policy, I believe, was based on realization that we're dealing with a government that came to power with terror. The Islamic Republic took American diplomats for the first time in history hostage, and then came back and put a gun to the world's head and said, if you want me to release the hostages, sign a contract, sign an agreement, a protocol with me, which was signed on 19 January 1981, to promise that you would not interfere with the internal affairs of Islamic Republic. A terrorist sponsoring government was born. It continued to exist through terror, not just by killing their dissidents abroad, but also terrorizing the people of Iran for so many years, for 44 years. Now, this has been going on. And, there was a change that came about based on realization that this government in Iran, Islamic Republic in Iran, is actually the enemy of the Iranian people. We saw that time after time. Every 10 years, people of Iran are fed up with the tyranny, with the terror, with the incompetence, with the kleptocracy of Islamic Republic. They come to streets and they get killed. And the last time they came, they had demands on political rights, but they also had demands on life. They were hungry. They came to the streets, and their response was bullets to their hearts as opposed to bread on their tables. So this is the government you face, and the good news is that the countdown on the life of this entity, this dark entity that has been confiscating Iran. And I say confiscating not because I don't like them, is because that's what their constitution refers to in very, very direct terms. The Islamic Republic views the Iranian people and the natural resources of Iran as war fields. Basically, it means we came here, we conquered, we own you, and we're going to, and it's in their laws. You have a guardian. It's called the Wali Faqih. You are not allowed to make decisions for yourself. Look at Article 93 of the Constitution of the Islamic Republic that says the parliament, the Majlis, has no powers without the Guardians Council. They have no powers, So how could you say people who are supposedly elected by the voters have no powers, and it's all deferred back to a council appointed by the supreme leader? So that's the country that you look at, and the policies that you devise to deal with this country cannot be policies based on trust, based on mutual respect. How can you respect a government that is so incompetent, that's so inept, so corrupt? I mean, they say we want nuclear power for peaceful reasons, for peaceful purposes. You're dealing with a country that cannot distinguish, in technical capability, cannot distinguish a departing passenger airliner with an incoming missile. That's the degree of their incompetence. And they killed 176 innocent people on board that Ukrainian flight. So policies that are based on trust and confidence and mutual respect and international standards don't apply to Islamic Republic. Islamic Republic is a terrorist sponsoring, inept, kleptocratic government. They're not even a government, they're a caliphate based on Islamic principles, and you cannot deal with them in that way. Now, granted, the language that was used in diplomatic exercise by the previous administration, by Trump administration, was a very direct language. It was not a win-win language. It was a I win, you lose, and I believe that should be the way to deal with the Islamic Republic. However, I do understand that the Biden administration has different ways, but I'm very confident that there will be no compromise in the interest of the United States by the Biden administration. They're professionals running. I'm done with the partisan, election talk. It's over. We have a new president. I wrote a note to President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris. I said, I didn't vote for you. And I was not exactly in line with your declared policy that, you'll return to JCPOA, but you're my president. And I hope that you keep in mind the best interest of the United States, which is to confront this terrorist sponsoring regime and not compromise with them. I'm very comforted that in response to a question that President Biden was asked by a reporter and said, are you going to lift sanctions before Iran comes back to compliance? His answer was an immediate, decisive, two-letter word, no. And I'm sure Ayatollah Khamenei heard that as well. Perhaps that's why he dispatched not the head of his diplomatic apparatus in Iran, Mohammad Javad Zarif, foreign minister, but the head of the Majlis to Moscow in a rush to go and deliver messages. You could guess what that message would have been. I don't know, but you could guess. And it's interesting that the delegation was turned around and pretty much humiliated, as they deserve it, by Moscow. So again, full circle to the policies. I believe this administration will do two things: deploy lesson learned from Obama administration, and also use leverage created by the Trump administration. And the days ahead for the Islamic Republic in Iran are not bright days.
Thank you so much for that comprehensive view. Really fascinating and full of details. Ms. Mansour, I'd like to go back to you. We discussed briefly, you brought it up actually yourself, the matter of human rights. Obviously for us, that is one of the most, if not the most important issue that we focus on in relation to Iran. The Democratic Party, especially its new progressive wing, speaks very frequently of human rights in the United States and also abroad. We will recall that after the murder of Mr. Khashoggi, the Saudi journalist, the Democratic Party was up in arms, as were many Republicans, rightfully so. It seems, however, that when it comes to Iran, they're less willing to discuss the Islamic Republic's human rights violations, less willing to discuss the Islamic Republic's crimes against humanity. Why do you think that's been the case? Generally, of course, not in all circumstances, as we mentioned. Why do you think that's been the case, and what do you see as the route forward? Do you see that changing?
It is very difficult to comment on a characterization of a party when it comes to an issue which has to be a universal stance. And I really believe human rights issue is not a Democratic issue, it's not a Republican issue, it's not right nor left. It has to be a universal issue that any leadership has to consider. I mean, I just want to give you an example. Back in the day when Navid Afkari was executed, an Iranian athlete in Iran, the then candidate Biden tweeted a statement calling it a travesty. And many other times you have heard not just President Biden himself, but many other elected officials considering Iran, the regime of Iran, as a rogue element, a nefarious regime, and one that shows little respect to its people or catering to their fundamental rights. One thing that I really believe we need to focus on is that there is this fractured state of politics in this country that I think Biden should be given the opportunity to use the grace period to come up with a very uniform policy, which is representative initially of the US national security. Believe me, if any administration in this country just focuses on the issue of national security, then they would see Islamic Republic's footprints on every bombing, the explosions, hostage taking, transnational repression. Their footprints is everywhere. The US district courts in this country, mostly in New York and Washington, are overwhelmed with the lawsuits against the Islamic Republic as a state sponsor of terrorism. There are many victims that are living in this country, many families that are still suffering from the incident in 1982 with the Marine barracks in Lebanon. We are talking about explosion of the Khobar Tower and many other incidents, not just in the region, but we are talking about Europe and South America. These are the solid facts. that any Republican or Democrat who's in the administration need to look at first, focus on the US national security. So an American passport holder when travels overseas would not be afraid of being targeted by the Iranian regime or its proxies just because they are holder of US passports. Then coming to the issue of human rights, in every talk with any other partner nation, the issue of human rights ought to be looked at. And I am hoping Biden administration would not follow the same policy as they have done with the Russians and the Chinese, because what literally happened was they allowed them to become sort of a capitalist enterprise government or society, but they failed to focus on the issue of human rights. And this is the route the JCPOA was taking. Let us give some money to the Islamic Republic, to the government. Hopefully they will get a good taste of this assets or capital, and they will be more friendly to listen to us. So let's not use the human rights issues as a Republican or a Democrat campaign, but rather it ought to be a US foreign policy in engaging with talks with any other nation that has a history of human rights violations, especially the Islamic Republic. In the past 40 years, they have become more audacious in committing these violations, but we get to see and hear of it more often now because of the availability of social media, because of the transition of news much quicker than before. So naturally, it ought to be one of the elements when they are inviting the Islamic Republic to the negotiation table. They need to talk to them. I have a laundry list of my own demands to the Islamic Republic that I with before they even engage in talks with the US government. And it doesn't matter if it's a Biden administration or a Republican administration. Whatever it is, we need to stand uniform in our arguments about human rights issues and demand it. This time, naturally, Biden ought to consider that, ought to bring up elements and even names of the individuals that are prisoners of conscience, people that are literally being suppressed and persecuted by the Islamic Republic. The issue of women's rights, the issue of minority rights in the country. We are talking about the Baluchis, the Dervishes, and many other ethnicities that are being imprisoned or executed as we speak without being mentioned anywhere. So naturally, human rights issues ought to be the focal point of any future talks between the United States and the Islamic Republic.
Well, our goal for this session was to lay out some bipartisan advice for the new administration. I think we're doing an excellent job between the two of you. So I appreciate very much the responses you're giving. On that note, Mr. Kiyon, the Biden administration, coming especially from Secretary Blinken, in regards to Iran policy, has indicated an interest in hearing a variety of opinions. Secretary Blinken, in his first press conference with the press corps, said that he did not want his Iran policy team or his other policy teams to be subject to the same groupthink that perhaps it was in the past. How can the Biden administration work across the aisle and work with both parties to formulate a more broadly supported policy vis-a-vis the Islamic Republic?
That's a very good question. And I believe Secretary Blinken and National Security Advisor, the president's directive is very clear. President Biden wants the best for what serves America's interest. And I believe in what Secretary Blinken has said. There is a little bit of disparity between what Secretary Blinken said and what at the operational level, Mr. Malley, who's now recently appointed, Mr. Malley said that the administration is eager to return to JCPOA, and Secretary Blinken said we will not return to JCPOA without compliance from Islamic Republic. But that's understandable because, you know, the language is going to be different, but the ways and methods and the goals are probably going to be pretty much the same. So I'm not worried about, you know, who plays a good cop and who plays the bad cop. That's normal in diplomacy. There is a person who appears to be closer to the other party, and that would be Mr. Malley. And there are people who are really experienced and they've seen what has happened in the past and would have different views. But that's not where it stops. I believe this administration would also look at outside of the administration and hear the views of outsiders. You know, I'm very pleased to share with you that my former colleague, former Deputy National Security Advisor, Victoria Coates, and her colleague, wonderful Director of Communications for the State Department, who really became the voice for the Iranian people at the State Department, Len Khodorkovsky. They have come up together with an initiative called the Cyrus Accords. And the Cyrus Accords basically is not a new initiative. It's an ancient bond between the descendants of Abraham and descendants of Cyrus the Great. As you all know, Cyrus the Great freed the Jews, allowed them to return to their homeland, and even contributed from the Persian Empire treasury for the Jews to rebuild the temple and be able to worship their beliefs in their own land. So in a way, it is not so unclear to be able to call Cyrus the Great the first world leader of the Zionist movement. And I say that with confidence because Cyrus the Great is the world's first leader of the Zionist movement, and reviving that old tradition between the two people would create boundless opportunities for the people of Israel and the people of Iran. And, you know, I believe this is an initiative that is going to start catching on between the two people before even the governments start talking about formalizing frameworks, because the natural sentiments are there between the people of Iran and the people of Israel. This is going to be a big change and a big movement. I believe the Biden administration, like I said, would learn lessons from the Obama years and the behavior of Islamic Republic. You know, as Dr. Mizrahi explained elegantly, it's always the clash between the intentions and the unexpected consequences that create these lessons learned in diplomacy. I don't believe that President Obama wanted to stand against the best interest of humanity and human rights and help the enemies of the Iranian people. No, I don't believe he wanted to do that. He had a good intention. Unfortunately, those good intentions were not well-informed policies. They were based on assumptions that proved to be wrong. I believe Biden administration has learned those lessons. I believe the Biden administration has seen how the strong leverage that was created by maximum pressure campaign, how it changed the balance, a different balance of power. It's not a balance of power between countries in the region. It's a balance of power between the people who want freedom and their government who terrorizes them, and their tyranny continues. That balance of power in the field of opposing forces is now favoring the people of Iran and not the government of Islamic Republic. So there is hope from all angles. And I have a strong belief that at the end, the people of Iran are going to win this war against the tyranny, terror, ineptitude, and kleptocratic ways of the Islamic Republic. The future is bright for the people of Iran and very dark for the Islamic Republic. That is my firm belief.
Well, you hit, sir, on an excellent point. First of all, extremely inspiring and hope-inducing, and we all needed that this morning, I think. Um, we are all tied on. You two are extremely busy, and I know you have many things, and we're so thankful that you made time for this event today to join our audience. I'd like to ask just one last question of each of you, and it's the same. I'll start with you, Mr. Kiyon, and then go to you, Mr. Mizrahi, to finish us off for today. And it's a point you just alluded to, sir, which is the Iranian people and how much hope there is in them. They're an actor on the stage that I think has, until recently, been ignored by foreign policymakers when it comes to Iran and the Islamic Republic. You mentioned that their role is going to be critical. I agree wholeheartedly, and that's what we're dedicated to do is sharing their voice. How would you advise, though, the Biden administration to engage the Iranian people, to empower them? What steps could be taken, steps that perhaps have been taken in the past that could be continued, or totally new ideas? What would you advise them?
That's an excellent question, Cameron, and I thank you for bringing that up. I believe the Biden administration will continue to listen to the people of Iran. Yes, in diplomatic practice, it is unusual for governments to engage people. They engage governments, no matter how brutal the governments are. Diplomacy requires governments to be able to talk to each other and not talk to the people. But people of Iran cannot be ignored. Let me just say this with confidence, that no matter what we say, people outside of Iran, the right to choose or change their government belongs to the people of Iran. They're the ones on the street. I sit here in the comfort of our offices in a country that protected by laws and a democracy that, sometimes it gets a little bit hurt, as we just had it. But we have a democracy. It is in place. I am protected. I can say whatever I want to say. So the best thing we could do is to reflect the voices of freedom-seeking people of Iran. And who are they? They're the ones who reject the entirety of the Islamic Republic. Why? Because the Constitution of Islamic Republic looks at the people of Iran as property of the Islamic Republic. And people of Iran are going to be heard, Cameron. They're not going to be silenced. They're going to be heard. They're going to have many, many voices here, from Democrats like my dear friend Dr. Zohra Mizrahi and others, to Republicans and to the general public. There's going to be a sentiment sympathizing with the rights, the true rights of the Iranian people, and also strategically looking at the best interest of the United States. People of Iran are the best friends of the United States in the years to come. In a free Iran would be a friend of Israel, a friend of the United States. People of Iran and people of Israel would do work together. And, I witnessed this firsthand. I used to travel to the Middle East years ago, and in private, the Arabs referred to the Israelis as our cousins. And in public, they were hostile and they looked angry. But that has changed. If you go to the Middle East today, there's no shyness about saying, no, we're going to work together with the Israelis and we're going to have a better future for our children and for our grandchildren. That is the future. That is the light. And too bad for the Islamic Republic. Islamic Republic will be buried in the dustbin of history. The people of Iran will be victorious. They will be best friends of the United States. And I can just see that day right around the corner. And I believe with all my heart that this administration will follow the best interest of the United States and will do what is right. I have no doubt in my heart.
That is our great hope. Thank you so much, sir. Ms. Mizrahi, the final word to you with the same question. Mr. Kiyon spoke so eloquently about the Iranian people. What is your view, and how can and should the Biden administration engage them?
Well, recently there was a public statement made by many Iranian activists inside Iran, Mr. Zartush Raqeb, I believe. He even spoke up that setting some terms and conditions for Biden administration before engaging in any talks with Iran or coming to any final agreement. Naturally, Iranians have the right to determine their future and their fate. And I think in recent years, many leaders have started a direct communication with Iranians using the social media outlet to make that happen. I think this should continue. And I believe it is the right of the Iranian people to determine their leaders, their government. And in this case, by making announcements, by joining the tweets for President Biden or many other elected officials, they will be able to get their voice across, and they will have the benefit of speaking their mind. And in this case, I truly believe, just like Mr. Kiyon mentioned, we are the privileged members living in diaspora. We ought to be supportive. We need to be more vocal about these issues without determining the future of Iran. That is the decision for Iranians inside Iran to make. They are the ones who are paying a hefty price. They're the ones who are losing their children, spouses, or loved ones by going onto the streets and just, enjoying the most fundamental right of speech. In this particular case, I believe there are many NGOs, many organizations that represent the silent majority. And they've been very mute and very inactive in the past several years, but it's time for them to speak up, to lessen the repeated and loud voices of the regime lobby, not just in this country, but also in Europe. This is the time for Iranians across the world to unify and to just focus on one issue, and that is Iranians for the right of Iranians to pick their own government without meddling into other affairs.
Well, this will be a unique Iranian event in that we all agree and we're ending on time. And I am so thankful to both of our guests for giving us this hour in what I know are your busy schedules of teaching and work and everything that you have. The goal, as I said, was to give the administration and those listening a bipartisan set of guidances for how they can go forward. And I think we achieved just that. This is a time for all of us, as Ms. Mizrahi rightly said, to work together. I think that things are indeed changing for all of us, and we're certainly coalescing in ways that we had not seen before. And we're thankful to leaders in our community and experts like the Honorable Mr. Bijan Kiyon and Dr. Zohreh Mizrahi.
I'm very humbled, and thank you for inviting us. It was great to be with you and to be with my dear friend, Dr. Mizrahi.
Thank you all very much. Have a great day. Stay